welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are laying out a very specific mission for you.
Yes, a really fascinating one.
We're going to explore how one single band managed to act as this sort of sponge for an entire society.
Yeah, absorbing everything around them.
Right, absorbing its soul, its struggles, and just the sheer chaotic energy of the time in real time. And we're drawing all our insights today from a really phenomenal, in-depth column published by Monumental Movement Records, or MMR.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And the focus of the source material is Les Colocs, which is a band that completely, totally redefined the cultural landscape of Quebec in the 1990s.
It is such a compelling narrative to unpack because, usually when we think of a massively successful pop or rock band from that era, we picture this pristine, sealed container.
Oh, totally, like a manufactured product.
Exactly. You imagine a perfectly formulated product designed by executives to just slide seamlessly into global radio rotation. It's supposed to be frictionless.
Right, appealing to as many demographics as possible without, offending anyone.
Exactly.
But Les Colocs wasn't a sealed container at all. They completely refused to polish away the grit.
It really did.
Instead, they just soaked up the messy, beautiful, and sometimes deeply tragic realities of the specific Montreal streets they walked. And to really grasp what they accomplished, you have to picture the cultural landscape of the early 1990s.
It's a very specific vibe.
Yeah. Global MTV culture is absolutely everywhere. Grunge is just exploding out of Seattle, and slick, heavily synthesized American pop is saturating the airwaves all around the world.
It was really the dawn of a peak global monoculture. The machinery of the English-speaking music industry was so massive and well-funded that it threatened to just flatten regional art everywhere it reached.
Which brings us to the central tension for you, our listeners, to imagine. If you are a French-speaking youth living in Quebec, Canada during this time, you're facing this really looming, heavy question.
A huge existential question, really.
Yeah. How do you protect your unique regional identity and your language from being swallowed whole by that massive English-speaking pop machine?
Okay, let's unpack this because Les Colocs did not just step up to answer that question with, standard rock anthems.
No, not at all.
They were this wild, uncontainable collision of punk DIY ethos, West African rhythms, harsh working-class realities, and literal street theater.
It's almost hard to categorize.
It is.
Yeah.
They physically embodied society's problems on stage, and they did it while making thousands of people dance.
Yeah, and, to understand how a band like that even forms, we have to look closely at the cultural petri dish that created them. Their MMR column points out that Quebec is entirely unique in North America.
Right.
But we need to establish the baseline of what their music scene looked like before the 1990s. Historically, Quebec's musical identity leaned really heavily on what's known as polite French chanson.
Yeah. These were very refined, acoustic, traditional folk songs. They often mimicked European styles, and they were heavily tied to a deeply conservative, rural Catholic society.
And that conservative baseline just gets completely upended in the 1960s, right? With what historians call the Quiet Revolution.
Yes, that revolution is the crucial turning point. The Quiet Revolution was a period of intense, rapid secularization. The province essentially just stepped out from under the heavy institutional shadow of the Catholic Church.
Oh.
And when a society suddenly sheds that kind of rigid control, it triggers an immediate search for a modern national identity. People suddenly have the freedom to express themselves differently.
Right, which makes sense.
By the 1970s, you see this resulting in highly complex progressive folk bands like Harmonium. But as the province modernized, the cultural center of gravity really shifted to the urban streets of Montreal.
And Montreal is, it's a city that defies simple categorization. It is incredibly diverse. You have the historic French and English communities, obviously, but you also have massive Haitian, African, Arab, and Latin communities all living side by side.
It's a total boiling pot of cultures.
Yeah, exactly. And when Les Colocs formed in that environment, they made a highly conscious choice about how they were going to communicate with that city. They did not sing in textbook international French.
No, they definitely didn't.
They sang in joual, which is the raw, working-class slang of the Quebec streets.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of that choice. Because in the context of the 1990s, when, polished English pop was the global currency, standardizing your language was the easiest path to commercial viability.
Right, it's how you get on the radio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So choosing a highly localized slang was a deliberate rejection of that global machinery. It was a deeply cultural statement.
It's like showing up to a high-end global black tie event wearing a worn-out local neighborhood sports
Oh,
jersey.
that's a great way to put it.
Right, like you know you're breaking the rules of decorum, but you are doing it specifically so that the people from your neighborhood see you on that stage and recognize you.
Yes. And that recognition is everything. By elevating working-class Jewel, they handed ordinary Quebecers a mirror. I mean, imagine being surrounded by slick, imported pop music that sounds like it was made in a laboratory.
It's just totally synthetic.
Right. And suddenly you hear a band blasting your own everyday street language back at you through stadium speakers. It provided immense cultural validation. It proved that their everyday lives were worthy of being amplified.
That is so powerful. And that street-level philosophy bled directly into the actual makeup of the band. The boiling pot of Montreal's cultures wasn't just happening around them. You can literally see that exact demographic mix reflected in their founding lineup.
You really can.
Even the name they chose, Les Colocs, translates to roommates in Quebec slang.
Which is a name that perfectly summarizes their sonic ethos. I mean, being roommates implies friction. It implies messy shared spaces, arguments over rent, but also this vital collective energy. Their music was the literal sound of people trying to live together in a crowded city with all the chaotic joy and frustration that entails.
And the ultimate roommate, like the gravitational center of this chaos, was the frontman, Andre Fortin, who went by Day Day.
Right.
The source material notes he was born in 1962 in a rural area called Normandale before eventually moving to Montreal. And that rural-to-urban pipeline gave him a really unique dual perspective.
It really did.
He carried the tight-knit solidarity of a small country town, but he also experienced the deep, isolating loneliness of the modern city. And he poured both of those extremes into the band.
He really did. Day Day embodied this fascinating archetype of the clown observer. If you watched him on stage, he was intensely theatrical. He wore weird costumes, utilized exaggerated comedic movements, and he even tap danced while playing guitar.
Wait, really? Tap dancing with a guitar?
Yeah, it was wild. But beneath that manic, festive surface, his lyrics revealed a razor-sharp social critic. He was using the comedy to disarm the audience so they would listen to the heavier realities he was singing about.
That's brilliant. And you see that complexity mirrored in his bandmates, particularly Patrick Esposito di Napoli, the harmonica player.
Yes, absolutely.
He brought Haitian roots, an immigrant perspective, and an incredibly raw blues sensibility to the group. His playing wasn't just a stylistic addition, it anchored their multicultural sound.
It was foundational.
Yeah, and they took all these disparate elements and translated them into these legendary live shows. We're talking massive participatory choirs, constant physical movement, and a collision of punk rock DIY ethos with festive folk music.
They completely dismantled the traditional distant rock star persona. They didn't want to be worshipped from afar. They wanted the crowd in the mud with them.
But I need to challenge how that actually functioned in practice, because typically when we talk about a band operating with a punk DIY ethos, it implies aggression. Punk is historically designed to alienate the mainstream. It challenges the audience, often pushing them away with sheer noise and hostility. So how did Les Colocs take raw, unpolished, chaotic energy and build a massive, inclusive party out of it?
Well, they did it by fundamentally altering the target of that punk energy. Standard punk uses aggression to build a wall between the subculture and the mainstream.
Right.
Les Colocs used that raw energy to tear walls down. Their genre-hopping, mixing punk distortion with blues harmonica, reggae bass lines, and folk melodies. It was radical inclusion.
Oh, I see.
They operated on an underlying philosophy of never sing alone. The massive group choruses and the festive brass instruments, they invited the audience to become part of the band. It wasn't about being technically perfect. It was about achieving a state of collective release.
And what blows my mind is how that chaotic communal release translated into massive radio-dominating success. They didn't just remain an underground phenomenon.
Not at all.
In 1993, they released their self-titled debut album, Les Colocs, and it completely took over the province.
It was an inescapable record. It featured huge, upbeat hits, like Mauvais Character and Julie. But the song that truly solidified their cultural importance was the mammoth track, La Rue Principale.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. La Rue Principale, which means the main street, deals directly with the slow death of rural towns.
It's incredibly vivid.
Yeah, the lyrics vividly describe the local grocery store being boarded up, the old men having nowhere to drink their coffee, and the youth packing up to leave because a faceless corporate megamart opened on the edge of town and hollowed out the local economy.
A very common story.
Exactly. That was a harsh, ongoing reality in 1990s Quebec. But it presents a massive paradox. A song detailing regional economic depression sounds like an absolute buzzkill. It is the equivalent of writing an upbeat dance anthem about a factory closing down.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals their genius. Les Colocs didn't write abstract political essays. They didn't stand on a soapbox and lecture the audience about macroeconomic policy or globalization.
No one wants to dance to that.
Exactly. They gave the economic decay a human face. They
Yeah.
sang about specific characters their audience recognized: the unemployed friend, the local addict, the guy sitting alone at the neighborhood tavern.
They made the political deeply personal.
Exactly. And then they took those heavy, melancholic lyrics and layered them over a relentless, swinging, brass-heavy beat. They balanced the anger and nostalgia with local humor and an irresistible groove.
Wow.
It created a psychological space where the audience could collectively process their societal pain, but experience it as a celebration of their own survival. You were quite literally dancing to the reality of your own struggles.
It is pure catharsis. You're just sweating out the anxiety of the recession together.
Exactly.
But just as the band reaches these euphoric heights, becoming the definitive voice for ordinary Quebecers, real-world tragedy strikes the roommates. It forces their sound to evolve into something much heavier. In 1994, Patrick Esposito di Napoli, their beloved harmonica player, dies of AIDS-related complications.
And to understand the weight of this, you really have to remember the social climate of 1994. The stigma surrounding the AIDS epidemic was incredibly oppressive. Many public figures and musicians went to great lengths to hide their diagnoses out of fear of public backlash.
But Les Colocs completely refused to hide it.
They rejected the stigma outright. They treated his illness and his eventual passing as a community issue. They refused to sweep his memory under the rug. They wrote a quiet, devastatingly poetic track called Dehors November, which translates to Outside November, that plays out almost like an intimate dialogue with the dead.
It's a heartbreaking moment in their catalog. But the following year, in 1995, they released their next album, Être Céramique. And this is a pivot that I find genuinely surprising.
Oh, definitely.
Because when a band loses a core member to a tragic illness, the natural expectation is that their next project will be sparse. You anticipate mournful acoustic guitars, slow tempos, and a very quiet, inward-looking sound.
Right, that's the standard grieving album format.
Exactly. Instead, they explode outward. They bring in Senegalese musicians. They heavily incorporate West African polyrhythms, massive layers of djembe percussion, and even bigger group vocals. Why pivot to complex West African dance grooves when you are in the depths of grieving?
Well, because for Les Colocs, the rhythm itself was the mechanism for resilience.
Huh.
I mean, think about it. Standard North American rock music relies on a very linear 4/4 beat. It is a driving, forward-marching rhythm.
Sure.
But West African polyrhythms are circular. They feature overlapping loops of percussion that create a trance-like, enveloping groove. By incorporating these circular rhythms, the band built a physical, sonic container large enough to hold their grief.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The rhythm doesn't march you past the pain. It gives you a space to exist inside it.
Yes, the music expanded to accommodate the weight of what they were feeling. And simultaneously, Day-Day's lyrics took on even sharper social critiques. He wrote about urban inequality and the people falling through the cracks of the city.
But he continued to lace that heavy subject matter with Quebec's trademark black humor.
Both did. They proved that profound tragedy and the urgent physical need to dance are not mutually exclusive. When things are darkest, the need to move together is actually heightened.
But carrying that much weight, that level of defiance and emotional output, it takes an incredible toll.
It really does.
As the decade came to a close, the sheer exhaustion of the city, the weight of the society they were carrying, and Day-Day's escalating personal demons began to drag them under. In 1998, they released the album Dehors November, named after that earlier song. And the MMR column describes this as a starkly darker, highly introspective record.
The societal backdrop of 1998 is vital for understanding this shift, too. Quebec was suffering from a massive collective hangover following the 1995 independence referendum.
Right.
The province had voted on whether to separate from Canada, and the no side won by a fraction of a single percent. It left half the population devastated and the entire society politically exhausted.
It's just totally drained.
It's exactly. The dream of independence stalled, urbanization accelerated, and a deep sense of fatigue settled over the province.
And you can hear every ounce of that fatigue in the music. There is a track on that 1998 album called Tassez-vous de là, which translates roughly to get out of the way.
Such a powerful song.
It really is. The lyrics perfectly capture the suffocation of the city. It talks about the crushing crowds, the desperation, and the exhaustion of simply trying to exist in a modern metropolis. The festive facade was cracking, and then the ultimate tragedy struck. In 2000, Dede Fortin took his own life at the age of 38.
It was a loss that profoundly shocked the entire nation.
He had truly become the voice of the people, so let me pose the heaviest question of this deep dive. When the voice of the people is silenced, and silenced so tragically, does the music lose its joy for the listeners who are left behind? Like, does an upbeat catalog just transform into a monument to sadness?
That is perhaps the most remarkable part of Les Colocs' legacy. Dede's death certainly mythologized the band, but their music did not become a pure tragedy. No. And the reason for that goes all the way back to their founding philosophy community.
Oh.
Because Les Colocs built their music from the ground up on collective choruses, shared participation, and local slang, the songs were never strictly confined to Dede. He had already handed the music over to the audience.
He literally structured the songs so the audience had to sing them to make them work.
And they still do. Today, across Quebec, these songs are still belted out at festivals, around campfires, and in crowded bars. The music wasn't just a performance of one man's pain. It was a communal toolkit designed for surviving together.
So what does this all mean? We started this journey by talking about pop bands as neatly packaged, pristine products.
Right.
Les Colocs proved the immense power of being the exact opposite. They were raw, they were incredibly messy, and they were vibrantly alive. They took Quebec's musical identity, which had leaned so heavily on polite folk and traditional structures, and they dragged it, kicking and screaming, into the modern streets.
They really did.
They forged a multicultural urban hybrid that embraced immigration, elevated the local working class slang, and completely refused to ignore the grit of reality.
They demonstrated that the most profound art doesn't exist simply to help us escape reality. The most enduring art holds a mirror up to the chaotic friction of living alongside other human beings. It reminds us that, whether we like it or not, we are all essentially roommates sharing the same society.
The ultimate colocs. It really forces you to appreciate the value of music that demands something of you, that asks you to sing along and help carry the cultural weight.
It truly does. And this raises an important question for you to consider, especially when we look at how we consume music today. In our current streaming era, where opaque algorithms constantly push us toward generic, globally appealing pop that is engineered to be frictionless.
Oh, absolutely.
Is it still possible for a band so hyper-localized, so heavily reliant on regional slang and the specific realities of their own neighborhood streets, to unite an entire culture the way Les Colocs did?
That is a lingering thought to keep with you. Because when you only look for the pristine, sealed containers, you completely miss out on the sponge that actually holds the water of your city. It's absolutely something for you to ponder the next time you put on a playlist. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep exploring the messy, beautiful music of the world out there, and we'll catch you next time.